Welcome to the 67th episode of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm A-Toads, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toads. We're back to recap our homecoming win against ECU. Let's get started. The Roadrunners beat down ECU on homecoming weekend, just like the students beat down the athletics department by voting down the athletic fee increase.
Wow.
UTSA had a season record 515 yards of offense and 5 touchdowns. The Roadrunners scored on their first offensive drive for the third game in a row, this time on a touchdown pass to Tyke Ogle-Kellogg. After trading scores, ECU briefly took the lead 17-14 after Frank Harris threw a pick six. However, the offense recovered on the next drive, tying the game on a 27-yard field goal. After a defensive stop on ECU's next drive, the Runners recaptured the lead early in the second quarter on an 84-yard touchdown reception by Josh Cephas, the longest touchdown reception in program history. UTSA would hold the lead the rest of the game. While the first half of the game showcased the offense, the second half of the game was all about the defense. UTSA's offense was held to just 10 points in the second half, while the Roadrunner defense held ECU scoreless until the last few minutes of the game. The final score from the Alamo Dome was 41-27. The Roadrunners improved to 4-0 in conference play, 5-3 overall. What were your thoughts of the game?
Well, first of all, it felt lackluster, right? We're not big on really talking about attendance, but it felt like there weren't a lot of people there, and with the lack of people that were there, the energy just felt down inside the dome. It just didn't feel like a normal game day. And even when we were in the lots, I would say lot C seemed the usual, but lot B seemed like it was lacking some of that energy.
Yeah, I think I had commented that had it not been for the student section being full, I would have thought we were back in the Wilson era.
Here we go. You started out spicy today. First of all, beating down the athletic fee increase by the students' comment, and now you're here talking about the Frank Wilson era.
Yeah,
it's gonna be a good pod.
And I feel like the athletic fee being voted down by such a large margin maybe just kind of fed into that feeling of it just seemed like something was off in the dome at first. It really concerned me walking in because I was thinking, is this going to be that trap game that we were afraid of? I thought, okay, this isn't going to happen. We're going to be fine. But then, you have these other things going on. And it's like, okay, is this going to just kill the vibe of the team?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because, honestly, looking at it, we started on defense first. And you thought that because this East Carolina offense was really bad that they wouldn't come out and throw a deep pass on the first play of the game and then complete it. Mm-hmm. It looked on defense like we didn't come out with very much energy. The offense obviously comes out and they kind of bring the energy up some more. But it was just, I don't know. It just felt stale. It felt like you wanted to be there, but then it was like someone made you be there. Mm-hmm. And I think it got better as obviously as the game went on.
Yeah, certainly it helped that there were so many explosive plays by the Roadrunner offense. We haven't seen that most of this season outside of, a few plays in the Army game.
Well, the Temple game too.
Yeah, I think that really just kind of helped, to make it more of an exciting game. Because the other thing was that there were all of these reviews for targeting. In that first half, there were 3 reviews for targeting. One of them got called against UTSA, 2 against ECU, which ended up being overturned. But it just felt like this game was going on forever and ever. And I just thought it was interesting. There was a quote from Stephen Whitaker that said, I guess he was asked, he said, well, what do you think is going to happen first, the end of the first half or Thanksgiving?
Yeah. And, maybe it was because people were getting ready for Halloween parties that night or whatever it was. It just felt like we couldn't get going. And once we got going, I don't know. I think it righted itself, but you're right. You get these reviews and it doesn't help that the runners start out kind of slow. Mm-hmm. I was concerned really that this would really slow down the offense and wouldn't get them going either because of the fact that, our Frank is probably at his best when he gets in a rhythm and he gets in a quick flow. Like sometimes I feel like they go too fast and, Frank will make a mistake here or there, but it really plays to his strengths that, they kind of start going fast and he can get into really a passing rhythm with his wide receivers. And, it happened. I mean, there was a lot of good things I think that came out of this offensive performance. The defensive performance in the second half felt really good. It was just sort of this kind of seesaw that we saw. And, I think we would love to say that it'd be better if they both came out with energy and didn't have to depend on, the offense to really kind of inject something into the defense. But, that's just not the way that the college football goes sometimes. Those reviews for the targeting that you were talking about earlier, I guess they were legitimate. The triplet one, triplet one felt a little ticky-tacky to me, but, once we watched the game, I understood it. The Cam Cooper one, initially I was like, no way. Even though we were in the touchdown club, I kind of saw it, right in front of us. Once I saw the replay, I was like, ooh, yeah, no, that was bad.
Yeah. I mean, in all honesty, going back and rewatching the game when we got to the unsportsmanlike conduct penalty on Frank Harris, given what was happening in that game and the amount of targeting calls, when you go back and rewatch kind of how he lunged at the defensive player Nash, I'm surprised they didn't call him from targeting, to be honest with you, because he kind of smacked him with his face, and I mean, I don't think in most cases a ref would call that targeting, but just given how this game was going, I think we're lucky that, frankly, Frank didn't get a targeting call.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we were watching it live, it didn't seem like Frank was really complaining as much as he was, but then the announcers really made it more known that he was complaining to the refs about, headshots and, extra shots on him. And I agree with you. I mean, it felt like when that penalty flag went up, I was like, this is what happened. And then you see the replay. And of course, Roadrunner fans all of a sudden stood up. They're going to protect Frank and everything. But here's the deal. It's still a penalty. No matter what, it's still going to be a penalty. And Frank deserves it. He owned up to it afterwards. But yeah, there is that level of concern where you're like, are we sure it's just going to be that? You're I don't know. I mean, I'm still wondering if they seriously thought about doing that. Oh, he wants to complain about headshots. I'm about to kick him out of this game, right? This is just, I wouldn't have been surprised, I guess.
I almost felt like there might have been an incentive for the refs on how many targeting calls they get. Did they have something where it's oh, if you have 10 targeting calls this season, then you get, I don't know, an extra $150 or something. Because, I mean, they're just...
It was close to the end of the month, so yeah, it could kind of play on to
like a speeding ticket?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there were 4 targeting calls in this game. I cannot remember a game I've ever watched where there were that many targeting calls.
Yeah, and I think the worst part about it, too, as we've kind of mentioned before, it just felt like they were all bunched together.
Yeah.
Even though they really weren't, it just felt like they all happened within about 5 or 10 minutes from each other. So it kind of led to the chippiness that kind of happened later with Finley Tatafu and Terrell Haynes. Since we were on the other side of the field, we obviously could not see what was going on. It wasn't until the rewatch where we saw exactly how Terrell Haynes came up and they just looked like a violent punch down.
Yeah, and even from the replay, you can't really tell exactly what happened. I mean, obviously, without sound or being closer, there's no way to really know exactly what happened. And Coach Traylor is certainly never going to give us all of the details. But, man, something pretty dramatic must have happened before the camera angle got there, or something must have been said that was, pretty egregious because... Terrell's a super senior. We've never seen him respond that way. I mean, there's lots of other guys. We can talk about DeJuan Griffin and his unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, which seems to happen fairly often. But for Terrell Haynes, I feel like it had to have been pretty bad because I just can't imagine, that's just not in his character of what we've seen from him, throughout all of these different seasons.
Absolutely. And I think that... I think he's also pretty protective of his guys. And,
Yeah.
You could tell that that's the reason Venli Tatafu responded the way he did. It felt like these guys weren't getting off the pile, or they were doing something within the pile. And because of it, like you said, we don't know what Terrell Haynes is doing, but Venli definitely was trying to get guys off of the pile. And that's when his shoving started, and, he responded. So, obviously unfortunate that all of this occurred, but we're talking about an East Carolina team that's not very good. They're frustrated. They probably played one of their better games in a long time after, playing Charlotte at homecoming and really not showing up for the game at all. I mean, they were just awful in that game. Coming to the Dome and then seeing homecoming again. I mean, you only schedule homecoming for an opponent because you're going to kick their ass. So this was, I think, just added more salt to the wound. And so obviously I think you could tell that they were frustrated. There was a defense that just got gashed, and they weren't appreciating the fact, that we were running it right down their throat.
Right.
Even more. All right, so before we go on, got to do a couple shout outs. We actually met up with 2 listeners. One was Gilbert. He was at the Bird Gang tailgate, and Caleb. Thank you guys both for listening. Caleb actually has, is I think the co-lead for the Meep Meep Nation. Also has a vlog. Does a really good job on there. Kind of talked to him a little bit about, podcasting, vlogging, stuff like that. Caleb, keep at it, man. I think as much content as UTSA fans can get, they will eat it all up. And
if you guys haven't had an opportunity to listen to their vlog or watch their vlog, I definitely encourage you to, because again, it's always great to hear all these different points of view in the different podcasts. And again, getting more and more UTSA content out there is just better for the entire fan base.
Absolutely. All right, can't leave out, though, the legendary UTSA meme maker, Bootleg Bentley. Got to spend most of the second half with him. He got to hear some of my non-pod game takes. I'm sure he will cover. He'll be fine. But I'm sure he's also surprised at some of the things that I was saying. So I'll be more low-key, Bootleg, just in case you're wondering. So anyway, we'll move on to the defense. Keys for the defense. First one was stay aware of errant passes in order to create turnovers. I know this sounds silly that I put this up here, but, look, we did get 1 interception from Elliott Davison, and there really should have been more.
Absolutely. I mean, there were a couple, and Pee-wee, Donye, Cam, and those are probably just the 3 that I wrote down. We had lots of opportunities, again, sometimes it's just easier to say that than, to actually be in the right place, in the right position, but again, we also thought that Mason Garcia was going to be the starting quarterback.
Yeah.
And, he's much less comfortable passing than Alex Flynn. Was kind of surprised to see that Alex Flynn not only got the start, but really played almost all of the snaps of the game.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting here was that Mason Garcia was actually the quarterback that the coaching staff felt was the number 1 guy.
Right.
So, as we prepared last week, we thought Mason Garcia is going to start. Our secondary is going to feast. Like, that's what's going to happen. And didn't end up that way. Alex Flynn came out and played a game, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there must be something else going on in practice that we hadn't seen on film because, Alex Flynn had played in multiple games, but this was the best that he looked. And so I think that's what probably contributed to the defense being a little bit off in the first, half, because they probably weren't expecting the Alex Flynn that they saw.
No, yeah, and I think that really leads to us kind of wondering whether the offense has not been performing well, and there were kind of rumors leading up to this game that potentially the offensive coordinator would be changed because of the fact that it was just a pitiful offense, right? So was it changed? Was it not? Mike Houston didn't say a word afterwards. However, both of us kept wondering, I don't know, this doesn't look like the offense we've seen.
I was going to say either the offensive coordinator finally just woke up and got it all together, or somebody else was calling plays, or at least contributing heavily to calling plays, because it really just looked like a very different offense. And, certainly hope that ECU has success after this game. Glad that the first quarter was kind of the anomaly. I mean, it seemed like after that first quarter, once UTSA's defense could kind of adjust to it, it was a very different ball game. But maybe they can catch some other teams off, by surprise, and they can have a great rest of their season as long as they're not playing us.
Right. Yeah, because look, Flynn was actually releasing it at different times. Like early on in the game, it looked like he got into a rhythm. He kind of held the ball, like I said, on that first throw and, took a deep shot. And then he was getting it out quickly at times, on some of these crossing routes that were there that, again, we hadn't seen. And we're not just talking about the Charlotte game. We're talking about previous games. We hadn't seen this type of kind of schemes there. So going back to something you said, because I really want to play up on this. I mean, the defense comes out, is not expecting a deep shot down the field, kind of gets smacked in the mouth with a completion. And then they're seeing something that they haven't really seen. The dome doesn't have the energy. It made sense, honestly, that first drive, that East Carolina almost took the lead right away.
Yeah.
Now, in saying that, we'll say, I mean, the secondary looked a little slow. There was, especially during the first half, and I don't know, again, maybe it's a scheme, maybe not, but they really had these receivers looking much better than I think that they really are.
Sure.
And, to me, we can go back and forth, and really criticize Lep on this. But you do have to, though, if you're going to criticize him, you also have to give him credit for making adjustments. Because as you mentioned, really shut out ECU until the last, 20 seconds when they scored a sort of a meaningless touchdown. I mean, look, they did give up the first touchdown pass to a wide receiver for ECU. ECU has not thrown any touchdown pass to wide receivers.
All season.
Season.
Yeah, I mean, that's just incredible.
I mean, we're used to like seeing our wide receivers like catch a touchdown pass like every single game. ECU, they're 8 games into the season.
Yeah, and they have 2 now wide receiver touchdowns that both happened in the UTSA game.
Well, and then going back to something Mike Houston said afterwards, he said, "Look, we haven't been able to replicate practice and going to game day, right? Like it just doesn't translate." Mm-hmm. To me, that's a coaching issue.
Sure.
And, I don't think that Jess Lep outcoached Mike Houston or their offensive coordinator, whoever it was. I just think that they put their trust in the wrong quarterback. And because of it, they had little success early on because they probably should have been starting Alex Flynn to begin with most of the year. I mean, he did a good enough job, but Alex Flynn succumbed to essentially a front 7 for UTSA that continually harassed him. You're talking about, Trey Moore attacking, Jamal Ligon, Owen Pee-wee really kind of moving around. We had Danye Taylor in there for a while, but apparently out with an injury, right? Didn't matter. Here comes Owen Pee-wee. Just name all the defensive linemen, all of them getting pressure on Alex Flynn. And so, yeah, you can say whatever you want about practice, but let me tell you, you can't replicate at times this UTSA defensive speed.
Right. And let's talk about Owen Pee-wee for a second. Man.
Sure.
I know you made this comment about Danye Taylor earlier in the season, but on one of those sacks, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but Owen Pee-wee looked like he had literally been shot out of a cannon as he was running towards Alex Flynn, and you could tell that Alex Flynn just did not have the time to react, and he just went down.
To be honest, to me, Owen didn't look that fast at first. You do the rewatch and you realize how fast he is, but maybe it's because he's taller, or at least I think he's taller than Danye. It just felt like a smooth couple steps over. Like Alex Flynn didn't have a chance from the very beginning, to your point. But it's also good to see that you lose Danye and then Owen Pee-wee, probably with slightly different skills, still coming up with the same production. Sure. I mean, he ends up with 4 tackles, 2 for a loss, a sack, as we just talked about, and another quarterback hurry. This ECU offense that has been maligned all year, just like I thought in our preview, really didn't stand a chance. Right. I mean, they just did not have a chance to be successful against a defense that I think now is really taking advantage of some of these offenses in AAC, much like they did in Conference USA. It's not to say that, our defense is bad or anything, but I think that they're getting their confidence up, and that's really going to help them down the stretch here because we do have, I think, going to be a much tougher November than we usually have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just catching fire. I mean, Jamal Ligon, who had been quiet,
Yeah.
the first few weeks that, you had mentioned that, had himself a game too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He ends up tying for the lead in tackles in this game with 7, 5 solo tackles, 2 assisted tackles. I mean, just the Jamal that we're used to seeing, but we really hadn't quite seen this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Trey
Of
Moore,
course. Yeah.
got to talk about him, right?
Yeah, 3 sacks and 3 tackles for loss. Certainly did not look like his ankle was bothering him this game at all.
Not at all.
He now owns the single season sack record in program history at 12. And we still have 4 games to go. And he looks healthy. So I can imagine that record is going to be broken by himself, many times over. He was also the American Conference Player of the Week on defense for the 3rd time this season. So really extremely impressive season that Trey Moore is having. And not only has he broken that single sack record for UTSA, I mean, it looks like he's on pace to break Marcus Davenport's career sack record. And he's a redshirt sophomore.
It's silly, right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
We were joking about it, I think it was the last pod, that, there was still 5 games left, so he should be able to, eclipse the single season record from Clarence Hicks. He might beat that one, or he did beat that one. Now he's going to possibly beat Marcus Davenport's single season or career record.
And
in
if he
the
doesn't
same
do it,
season.
I was going to say, if he doesn't do it this season, if we're fortunate enough to have him back next season, it's absolutely going to be on then.
Just, again, monster. I think, again, you have sort of that balance between offense and defense. Defense, rough start, kind of got acclimated, and then really did a great job shutting ECU down in the second half. We moved now to the special teams. Really, it was a good showing. Mm-hmm. I know that Coach Traylor probably felt differently. I think he said it was more of sort of a draw when it came to them and ECU. But maybe it's because Tate Sandell didn't have like a huge hit, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, I felt like it was a good showing. Yes, we had that very unfortunate missed field goal in the 4th quarter. But if you go back to that play, we've kind of talked about it a little bit with the situation with Terrell Haynes and Vinley Tatafu. I mean, we were on, I don't know, this 2-yard line.
Yeah.
We're about to score. And the next thing you know, we now have 2 unsportsmanlike penalties and ejection, and we're back 30 yards the opposite direction. And then we don't complete a pass. The next thing you know, here's Chase Allen coming out to kick a 52-yard field goal. He probably was thinking, okay, well, I'm about to kick an extra point, and now you're asking me for a 52-yard field goal, and that's, 1 yard away from his career long. So, I mean, certainly I'm sure he would love to have another try at that, but he probably just wasn't in the headspace of thinking, I'm about to kick a field goal, and if he did, it was, I'm going to kick a field goal.
Shot. Yeah.
That's an extra point, basically. So I can't really blame him for that. Obviously we had the targeting penalty with Cameron Cooper, which, it turned out to be an offsetting penalty. So in terms of yardage, it didn't really impact us on special teams, but now we have Cam Cooper out for the first half of the North Texas game.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Tate got to re-kick that, and it ended up being through the end zone, not returnable. So,
with Memphis still committing a penalty on that play, so
ECU,
sorry, ECU having committing a penalty. So yeah, it was it was an interesting sequence of events there that just even on rewatch we were like, we were there and it's still bizarre. But otherwise, a good performance. You can't say, there wasn't any coverage breakdowns or anything. So, obviously, just good. Let's go on to the offense. Keys to the game. Grind them down with a 3-headed running back attack. Well, we kind of did, I guess. Kavorian Barnes had 7 carries, 8 yards. Rocco Griffin had 5 carries for 80 yards. Along of that 69-yard trot that... he got motoring. I'll just say, I wasn't expecting that.
No, initially I thought, oh, it must be Robert Henry. And then I was like, wait a second, it's Rocco Griffin. He's got some wheels.
And I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that I leaned over to you and I was all, man, Robert Henry seems a little bit slower, but he's still going. I think you're the one that told me that's Rocco. And I was like, oh, Sorry, Robert. Okay, so anyway, Robert Henry, though, he had 4 carries, 17 yards, 1 touchdown. I think the rushing game was fine. I don't think that there was, anything I think to be discouraged about. Certainly you wish that you could have pushed around this East Carolina defense, but the fact of the matter is, reason you're getting these big plays, if you've heard Coach Traylor talk about it or Frank talk about it already, then you know what we're going to say. Because East Carolina was stacking the box, and it led to some explosive passing plays, obviously. But honestly, I really think that East Carolina thought they were going to try to grind us down with the rushing game.
Absolutely. And, they challenged Frank, and, Frank is definitely back to close to his old form. So it was not that big of a challenge for him to make those big explosive plays. And while we don't have all of the same wide receivers from last season, certainly Devin McCune has stepped up quite a bit. He really didn't have that many catches in this game, but the one that he did, which was almost a touchdown, in the half-yard line, was extremely impressive. And then you have Tyke stepping up again, and it's really great to see what Tyke has done this season, because in some ways it's frustrating because that he had this potential to do this all along.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's great to see him really putting it all together in his last year. I mean, apparently he can catch a touchdown pass for less than 40 yards. I mean, this season it seemed like every touchdown pass to Tyke was 40-plus yards, including one this game, which was 43 yards. But apparently you can use him in short yardage as well.
That's a great play. I mean, he's exactly the receiver you want out there anyway in those situations, because he did really well in terms of blocking this game. Helped in a couple of these other in Josh Cephas's touchdown catch, but he really adds a different dimension around the goal line, because with the tall receiver you can really just throw it up, and that's really not Josh's game, to be honest with you. I mean, he's more of catching in stride. He's not really a jump ball type receiver, whereas Tyke is more of I can high point this ball wherever it is.
Right.
And I remember you saying it felt like Frank kind of released it kind of high, but he put it in the right spot. And the thing is, Tyke got 2 feet down.
Yeah, and he's like 6'5". So.
Right. So, again, using his height to his advantage, and honestly, you're right. The fact that you see him playing so well, it's just so encouraging, because of the fact that going into the season, we had an unknowns. I mean, you lose you have 3 prolific wide receivers. You're afraid that one's going to be out because of some off-field incident. You have another one that transfers, and another one is out from a injury from last season. There was a lot of speculation about how quickly JT would come back, but it was the prospect of you're not going to have any of the 3 to begin the season. And that kind of sounds a little frightening, but I mean, looking back now, I think Devin McCune has, starting from the very beginning, has really helped Frank become a better quarterback. Honestly, I think that Frank has really stepped into a really good role as a distributor here, and because of it, you just see his guys just making plays, and it's really just him making simple passes too. It's nothing difficult, and that's not a slight to Frank. It's more of just you're doing what you're supposed to do.
And it's also, if anything, it's a compliment to Burke that he's now putting them in these positions where they can, again, make these easier passes, or passes that our wide receivers are going to be more successful at.
Yeah, and I think he went away from the screens. Like, you're not seeing screens anymore in the bunches that we had before. I mean, seeing these Roadrunner wide receivers really running free through the secondary, it's terrific. I mean, some of it, obviously, people are going to point back to the offensive line, but a lot of it, too, is just the concepts. We've attacked the middle more. We've seen the run game really set up some of these deep shots, because you do see some, the linebackers and safeties kind of creeping up, and you're catching them like you did here with East Carolina. I mean, East Carolina, as vaunted of a defense as they had, I didn't feel like they had such a good defense that it was really going to bother Frank.
Right.
The only thing that concerned me was if they started sending guys from different angles, which they did a few times, and it did bother Frank. However, I don't know if the East Carolina defensive coordinator took a smoke break or something, but you had UTSA somewhat I would say, kind of pinned down, had really kind of curbed these explosive plays, and then you couldn't do anything about it. I will also add, though, that I think this offense really just overall was playing well in that first half. They started brimming with confidence, even after the pick six that Frank Harris threw.
Yeah, well, let's talk about attacking the middle for a second. And one of the critical mistakes that ECU made when they left the middle of the field open and lost Oscar Cardenas right in the middle, right by the end zone. I mean, it was just even more egregious rewatching it and seeing kind of how ECU played that, where you had both of the secondary turn their back on Oscar and look because they were just so convinced that Frank was going to throw a fade.
That's a great point. I mean, because if you go back and look at the Oscar Cardenas touchdown pass, essentially it looked like two of the safeties turned their back to the middle, and so they were facing the outside hash marks. And so when Atos is making this remark, what cracks me up was that I remember telling you during the rewatch, I said, "Whoa, stop that!" And you're like, "What?" And I told you they literally turned their backs to Oscar, and so we go back and rewatch it, and yeah, it really was total disrespect to Oscar.
It was almost like Oscar said, "Part the seas of uselessness," and then he went in the middle and caught the ball.
Spicy Atos, everybody. Yeah, I mean, it was probably the easiest touchdown of Oscar and Frank's career.
Sure.
But you know what? That's the Frank I like. And going back real quick to his, personal foul penalty that he had, I get irritated with Frank when he starts talking trash, because the best way that I think he can talk smack back to the defense is to do exactly what he did a few plays later. He threw a touchdown pass.
Yeah.
Him throwing some deep passes, and I love it when he throws deep down the middle. I just love him attacking that middle. Yeah, I mean, I could see him do that over and over and over again. I'd be completely happy. And I know, obviously, that's not always going to happen, but to me, that just embarrasses the defense even more. So to see that touchdown pass, it was just chef's kiss.
All right, well, we got to talk about we got to talk about Josh Cephas and those two really impressive receptions with the yards after catch.
Okay.
The first one, I mean, they were almost the exact play. The only difference really was who was blocking for him and kind of the direction that he took. Yeah,
well, the first one was, he was kind of he was actually coming down or around on a crossing pattern. Mm-hmm. The second one, he kind of squirted out because it's usually a throw to Oscar, and the safety came down on Oscar. And so let me ask you this. If you're a defensive coordinator, why would you let Josh Cephas run alone? Because that's exactly what they did in both plays. They kind of released him, and nobody took him.
Right. It was just crazy. And that second touchdown pass, again, you had Tyke blocking for Josh, and it was just perfect the way that, Tyke blocked it. Josh was, able to kind of come around the corner and then get in for the end zone.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, it just speaks to both of them. I mean, obviously Josh making a great play, but then again, Tyke being much more selfless
right.
and blocking downfield. Blocking's really improved for these wide receivers. We could really get on these guys for having just a offensive output in the second half, but I think the reality is that it's not going to matter right now, but it's something to kind of think about or keep in your head as we kind of go into November.
Yeah, and one of the most impressive pieces of that touchdown reception, so that was 84 yards. The previous record for touchdown reception was back in 2012 when UTSA played New Mexico State and Eric Sosa connected with Kenny Bias. I mean, for a record to stand, again, we're a young program, for a record that stood since 2012 to get broken by Josh Cephas is just quite impressive. He's now the second receiver in program history after Zakari to have 3,000 career receiving yards. All right, let's talk about the North Texas game. We haven't won a game in not just Denton, but the Metroplex
Yeesh.
since 2013. This is always a tough game for us when we go and play North Texas, particularly at home. We do open, though, as an 8-point favorite, and we do have a new head coach at the University of North Texas that we'll be facing, Eric Morris. But the good news, maybe for UTSA fans, is that we have played an Eric Morris team before. Back in 2019, when he was at UIW, UTSA beat them 35-7 in the Dome in our season opener.
Yeah, let's not forget that was Frank Harris's first game ever as a UTSA Roadrunner.
Yep.
He had been coming off those 2 years of, knee injuries, and they played well, right? Like,
Yeah.
It was UIW's, and they're an FCS school. Yeah. You were kind of hoping to kind of pour it on a little bit more, but it was Frank Wilson's Steve Henson year, right? It's where it was that
the end of his era.
Yeah, where things were fine, and you could tell that Frank was going to need much better offensive coaching in order to really even attempt to get to the level that he even is now, right? Enough about that, though. Let's talk about the Eric Morris here, because his North Texas team, at least this first one, reminds me of some of the Mike Leach Texas Tech teams that even Morris played for at the time. That the offense would win the shootouts and the defense would just do enough, if even that.
And I think that's where they've struggled. If you look at their history, they've had these games that have gotten very close, and honestly, looking at it as a UTSA fan make you nervous, because they almost came back on Tulane, they almost came back and won the Memphis game, and you look at those games, and the reason they're almost is because they're not balanced. They have a very good offense, but their defense is lacking.
Absolutely. I mean, we're looking at an offense here that is 9th in the nation with 485.2 yards per game, and they score 35.5 points per game, which ranks 19th nationally. Now, just in AAC play, they're putting up 504.3 yards per game, which is tops in the AAC, and then they're 4th in conference by scoring 34.8 points per game. So, yeah, I mean, they've got some prolificness to them, and a lot of it is just being done with names we've seen before.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the quarterback, who is a transfer in from Louisiana Monroe, I mean, these other skill players, UTSA fans know them from the last couple of years we played them. Iowa Day, he's a junior running back. This year is 81 carries, 611 yards, 4 touchdowns. He was very strong running back. He was the second running back, I think, to Ragsdale, who is out with an injury. He's now their leading running back this year. Oscar Adaway, he's a junior running back, 68 carries this year for 347 yards, 3 touchdowns. Again, a name of someone who's played against UTSA in the past. Their wide receivers, Jamori Macklin, sophomore wide receiver, and he has 39 receptions for 703 yards, 11 touchdowns. Their other 2 wide receivers each have 4 touchdowns, Damon Ward and Roderick Burns. These guys are not super tall wide receivers. They're all 5'9" or 5'11".
They're Eric Morris types. I mean, they look like Eric Morris height, right?
Yeah, but again, these are the guys that were catching balls against, UTSA last year.
Right. I mean, there's not a lot of difference here, and I think that helps with the offensive continuity for Eric Morris to kind of come in. But really, I think the difference maker, and you already kind of alluded to him, is Chandler Rogers, quarterback. Look, here's the thing that I've seen from him. He didn't start out the season, and when he did come in, he was But in watching him play the last few weeks, I'm going to go as far as saying that he certainly would have given UTSA a scare last year, and Luttrell would still be a coach for UNT if they had Chandler Rogers in the way he is playing, because Chandler Rogers is absolutely killing it. 5 300-plus games. He's thrown for a total of 2,173 yards. He's got 19 touchdowns, but 1 interception.
Yeah, and I don't think any of those interceptions happened in conference play.
No, they have not. And that's the thing, is that Chandler Rogers, I think, is making the right plays.
Yeah.
That's all you really want from your quarterbacks. and he's doing what is necessary to make sure that his players make those plays. Now, this UNT offensive line, again, a lot of guys that you may have seen before, but the thing is that their interior line is good. It's their two tackles that are liabilities. They struggle on the outsides. Left tackle Casey Mareka and right tackle Jet Duncan are graded low, and even from watching them against Memphis, they really struggled. A lot of the things that they were doing on the offensive scheme, we're trying to run it essentially kind of up the middle. A lot of same type of plays that UTSA runs. Like there's really not a lot of difference in how everybody's doing it. It's just really the timing and the caliber of player. And honestly, North Texas, while they, I think in some cases have a lower quality of player than UTSA, they're still doing everything pretty well and at a high caliber. So, it's hard to argue with, an offense that is so prolific right now. But as you kind of mentioned, they have to be prolific because this defense is just abysmal.
Yeah.
You have an East Carolina team that had a defense that was really good, but their offense was abysmal. I mean, some of these guys, some of these guys though are in some cases, the AAC teams are young. In this case, it doesn't feel like they're young, though.
No, I mean, certainly a lot of the same names. I mean, it's a different defensive coordinator. Pains me to say this. Matt Capone, he came from Iowa State. He was a quarterback coach. I know. But, look, some guys are cut out to be position coaches. Some guys are cut out to be coordinators. We'll see what happens after this year. Maybe he's just one of those guys that isn't cut out to be a coordinator, or maybe it's that he's trying to run a scheme that doesn't meet his or fit his personnel. I don't know.
I think it's the latter right now. I think that's exactly what he's looking for, is to try to upgrade the defensive personnel, because look, they're allowing 475.8 yards per game, 130th nationally. That's the bottom. That's last.
Yeah.
And then they give up 36.6 points per game, which is 125th nationally. They're scoring 35.6, but they're essentially giving up one more point. So you realize why they have a losing record at this point. Now, in AAC play, they are allowing 448 yards per game, which is slightly better, but it's still 10th in the conference. And then they give up 30.3 points per game, which is 10th in the conference.
Right.
Again, you see just where they're landing. I mean, they're outscoring opponents here in the AAC, but it's really not by much, and they're really struggling. You talked about Tulane and Memphis, and if they make a couple stops, they pull off those games, and that could be huge, not just for North Texas, but huge for the Eric Morris tenure. I mean, we're looking at guys like Jordan Brown, a linebacker, a junior linebacker, who is leading the defense in solo tackles with 36, and then total tackles he's got 66. You got Logan Smith, a safety, and then name we've heard before, Mason Richards. I think he was a D2 guy that Latrell found and then kind of turned him into a decent defensive end. Mm-hmm. But he's still a small dude. And really, that's the problem, I think, with this defensive line. They're pretty light up front. Now, the 3-3-5 that they run, you can have some smaller defensive linemen. However, the quality of defensive linemen that you need is not here, because especially you got some big weak spots at the left end with Farafehi Vailiu, I think I said his name correctly, and Cortland Rossaw. Both players just struggle to stop the run, and Memphis was really abusing them early in the game by running right at them. This defensive line, because it's so light, they really can't keep the offensive linemen off of attacking that second level. And because of it, you get these linebackers that, while somewhat athletic and somewhat smart, they're having to go up against offensive linemen. So, of course, they're going to get blown off the ball. So, problems there. It's a defense that I think is definitely one that can be taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about special teams. I mean, seem to be fairly consistent. They have a kicker who, I don't really know that he has a very long range, because he hasn't kicked anything longer than 49 yards, but he seems to be pretty consistent. There's nothing really special about their special teams, but nothing that's glaring either.
Gotcha. All right, well, let's go to the keys to victory. For the UTSA offense, you got to limit 3-and-outs. One of the things that Memphis struggled with, and so did Tulane to a point, was that they continually got 3-and-outs in the second half, and it just allowed North Texas to, especially their offense, to kind of gain steam, and you just can't afford that. They can be very quick strike, and with that, they become incredibly dangerous if they do become quick strike. Second key, I think, is going to be out of that defensive line by targeting Vileo and Rossaw. Like I said, this is a light defensive line, and with the offensive line that UTSA has, even though it's not really built for the passing game or the quick offense we really have, should be able to wear down this line. I mean, they're not really deep, and even the backups they have on that 2 deep, they're really not great players or very good players. So add the fact that they're not very good and they're kind of light, it just doesn't make a good mixture for this defense. Now, keys for the UTSA defense, I think they need to be selective with the blitz. Chandler Rogers feasts on blitzing teams. Obviously, his numbers when he's pressured go down a bit, but when I was looking at some of those numbers, they didn't go back. They didn't dip that much.
Right.
It speaks a little, or harkens to me a little bit more of like Frank Harris. Frank Harris, when he gets pressured, usually his number overall ratings don't go down very much. Same thing with Chandler Rogers. Chandler Rogers is very smart, very good at getting the ball out at times, and he varies whether holding the ball or getting the ball out quick, and that really throws off a defense. The other part is the secondary's got to play discipline here, and I know that seems like, well, what if we get too aggressive? Well, that's the thing, is that you got to keep your head on a swivel here. You got to stay with your receivers, because in a lot of these cases that I've seen against Tulane and Memphis, and really focus on these 2 games because Tulane and Memphis are about the caliber as UTSA. They took advantage of some of these secondary personnel because essentially they just started cheating up, and I think dared Chandler Rogers to beat him at times, and it didn't turn out very well for them. I mean, obviously they ended up with wins, but I mean, North Texas really took them to a hilt. So, all right, let's go to our predictions. I will let you go first.
All right, anything can happen in a rivalry game, and we've seen that way too many times when we played North Texas. They might have a new head coach and a new quarterback, but as I mentioned, a lot of those playmakers are the same, and they're going to be looking for revenge after UTSA beat them twice last season. Expect to see fireworks on offense. The difference in this game is going to come down to defense and the strength of UTSA's defense. Can UTSA win this game? Absolutely. Should UTSA win this game? Definitely. Will UTSA win this game? We're going to find out on Saturday. I'm expecting a nail-biter, but I'm optimistic that we're going to squeeze out the victory, and having Eric Morris there is going to help us get rid of that bad Metroplex juju. So give me UTSA 38-34.
Nice. All right. There are only 2 schools that irritate me in college football: Texas State and North Texas.
I think there's more than that, but I'll let you have that.
Okay. It's a good weekend when either team loses, and a great one when both lose. Like they did last weekend, by the way. I'd love to see UTSA beat both this season, and Saturday presents that opportunity. The North Texas defense is bad, but it never matters against UTSA, right? Like they just seem to find that right note. I feel like both sides of the ball for UTSA will have their moments, but I don't think they'll be able to quite put UTSA or North Texas away. I think Chandler Rogers has himself a second half and leads North Texas to a near upset of UTSA. I don't like picking UTSA in the Metroplex, obviously for the reasons we've stated before, but they got to hit sometime. This is tough. Give me UTSA 41-38 over North Texas.
All right. Before we go, let's talk about some of the other games in the American Conference this weekend. SMU crushed Tulsa 69-10.
Did Tulsa even show up?
It's debatable. I mean, we watched the first part of that game, and Tulsa certainly didn't look great, and then it just got worse.
Yeah, I think I looked at you when we got to the tailgate, and I said, it's not even halftime. I think it's already like 45-3. But you see, UTSA, this is what you can do too.
Yeah. Tulane escaped Rice. You heard that right. Escaped Rice. 30-28.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to go back and watch this game just to see what happened, but part of me is like, sometimes some of these schools that are playing really well, like all of a sudden get bored and they kind of play with their food too much and then have to like come back and win.
I guess the only good thing we can say is that Tulane is not listening to us and our advice on running up the scores on these teams, and they always end up seeming to let the other team kind of get back into it and then, escaping 2 weeks in a row, where SMU, on the other hand, is, just absolutely going the opposite direction. So
it is good to see some of these teams that are like really, really challenge some of the top teams. And I know that sounds like kind of counterproductive because, obviously we're going to be playing Rice late, in a couple weeks, but you still want these teams to be good. I mean, you want to crush them, but you want to be good because
you want to beat a good team, yeah.
Because if not, then you're going to be saying we beat 3 teams that are ranked, 127, 129, and 130, and there's 132 FBS teams, right? So we don't want to be pumping our chests like that.
Right. Yeah, certainly. I mean, we can definitely not sleep on that Rice game in 2 weeks. And then FAU rallied to beat Charlotte 38-16. I think Charlotte was kind of running on this thought that, they just beat ECU, and so maybe they were better than they were, and then FAU showed them that was not the case.
They need to look at what their coach is wearing and realize they're really not that good, because Biff Poggi, he's going out there with cut-off shirts, and it is the oddest thing to see.
Yeah.
And his team isn't very good.
Well, and then apparently he has now suspended several of the players based on some of their conduct from the FAU game. So they won't be playing against Tulsa. And Tulsa's a team that, we just said, got beat 69-10. This is a game that you could potentially win, but now you're imposing some self-inflicted wounds. So
it's going to be an ugly game. It's going to be regardless. Even if he had those players, it'd be ugly.
All right, well, let's talk about a team that is the complete opposite and is doing really well right now, our volleyball team.
Yes.
They are on a 5-game conference winning streak. They added wins over Memphis 3-1 on Friday and a win over FAU in straight sets on Sunday. This is their longest winning streak in conference play since 2018.
Coach Torek. Wow. It's great to see, right? It feels very kind of Coach Aston-ish and Coach Pittman-ish, right? Where they like kind of had some tough seasons, and then all of a sudden you see that sort of resurgence and kind of moving forward. And we kind of mentioned it last week, but man, this is great to see. This is really great to see from the volleyball team.
Yep, absolutely. You have 2 opportunities to see them at home before the end of the season. Their next 2 games are at the Convocation Center against Tulsa, Friday, November 3rd at 6 p.m. and Saturday, November 4th at 2 p.m. Of course, those games are on ESPN Plus as well if you were traveling to Dallas like we are. And now let's talk about soccer. They finished their season with a 2-0 win over Rice. So got to leave on a high note, even though this wasn't exactly the season that they were hoping for. Yeah,
goals from Sasha Dade and Marley Frey. Sasha, essentially, it was a rebound off a corner kick. Again, those set pieces come back to help this UTSA team. And then Marley Frey, really nice shot at the goal, and was able to that ball was able to deflect off the goalkeeper and go into the goal. So just really good stuff. It was interesting, on the broadcast though, that the announcers, which were Rice announcers, said that they had spoken to Coach Pittman, and he acknowledged that the season didn't go as he had thought or would have hoped for. But that he'd be looking for some attackers in the transfer portal and in recruiting. So I think he acknowledges where this team is at. This team is very good defensively, and it makes sense because even after, if you go back to the episode that we had with Coach Pittman where we interviewed him, he's obviously a former goalkeeper. He stresses defense. That's that's who he's going to be. That's what his teams are going to be. And no matter what, they are going to be organized. So, yeah, it was tough to see them not score as many goals this season. Obviously, I think there's probably some changes in play that they need. But overall, I mean, you end up 7-7-4, 2-4-3 in AAC play. Those 3 ties, and even a couple of those losses could have swung with just, a goal or 2, right? And that I think is big. But we were talking about him, being strong defensively. Well, here's some defensive records for you. Freshman goalkeeper Jasmine Kessler finished with a freshman record of 0.67 goals against average. You just couldn't score on her. I mean, she obviously had some stout defenders that were in front of her, but she still made some great saves, and she continued to improve as the season went on. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting because, Mia Krasinski's a hell of a goalkeeper, but Jasmine Kessler, man, she has got a leg, and it's going to be interesting to see, who keeps the other one off the field because, and I think that's how Pittman wants it, right?
Right.
Who's going to challenge who to be on the field? UTSA as a team, though, ends the season with a 0.72 goals against average, which is a program record.
Wow.
We just don't allow goals. And that's amazing. That, like I said, this team was structured defensively, and because of it, you saw them just shut other teams down. The last thing, though, Deja Sandoval ends her career with a program record, 87 appearances. Most, obviously, like I said, is a program record. So, congratulations to her. She had a great season. She was one of the 8 seniors on this team that we said goodbye to at that Rice game. Really have to say thank you to them for setting the success or setting this UTSA soccer program up for success in the future in AAC play. I mean, we're going to lose some big-time contributors and some role players, but, man, they've been the foundation for this program for a few years, and I think they're leaving this program in the right hands. You're seeing better talent coming to UTSA, which we just talked about the volleyball team going on this good winning streak. You saw the soccer team do that and see USA play last season, and this season they still played well. So honestly, thank you to Mackenzie Caulfield, Michaela Cortez, Alex Granville, Avery Cheney, Serena Russ, Marley Frey, Stewie and her donkey, and Deja Sandoval. Forever you will be Roadrunners. Thank you for everything you did to the soccer team.
All right, well, I think that about wraps it up for us on the Hail Mary podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm Atovs.
And I'm the Tovs.
We'll be back next week to recap our win against North Texas.
Birds up.